Welcome, everyone. I'm Mindy Towsley, and I am the Executive Director of the Artists Archives of the Western Reserve. Welcome to Art and AIDS. The mission of the archives, for those of you who don't know, is to collect representative bodies of work by Ohio's visual artists. We have a facility, a permanent facility on East 123rd Street by Lakeview Cemetery. And we have an exhibition space there, and we have collected 89 artists to date, and we have 10,000 works in our collection. So this program tonight is part of the CONVERGE exhibition. This is a large exhibition encompassing as many artists from the LGBTQ IA+ community that we could gather. It takes place not only in our gallery space, but in 4 other venues. It is at Lake Erie College, Metro Health, the LGBT Community Center of Greater Cleveland, which is in the Detroit Shoreway neighborhood, Gordon Square, actually, and also Judson Manor. The exhibition runs for 1 more week, so last week is the last week to see it. And we have a couple of receptions still. We've tried to have receptions at every one of the partner venues. The reception tomorrow night, starting at 6 o'clock, is at Metro Health, and we still have some openings. If you'd like to RSVP for that, please go to our website, www.artistarchives.org. We also have a closing reception coming up next week, Thursday, October 14th. That is at Lake Erie College. The exhibition will actually go until the 16th, but the closing reception will be during the times when the college is open. So it'll be at 6 o'clock. Actually, that one starts at 4:30, I believe, and goes until 7 o'clock at LEC. So please join us if you can. And there's no RSVP for that one. So we're hoping we're going to get a really good crowd. Now I would like to introduce my staff, and I'm going to turn it over to them. I'd also like to thank everyone for coming. Before I do that, sorry, I almost forgot. Too many Zoom programs this year. So thanks everyone for attending, and thank you very much for our panelists for joining us tonight. Gil Kudrin, Martha Pontoni, Daniel Marcus, and M. Carmen Lane. I'd like to thank the funders of the archives, Cuyahoga Arts and Culture, the Ohio Arts Council, the Bernice and David E. Davis Art Foundation, the Gunn Foundation, and the Zufall Foundation, and all of our members and supporters and our board of directors. Thank you so much for supporting the archives. So we have our staff for tonight is, I'm going to start with Kelly Pontoni. Kelly is the lead curator for CONVERGE, and she also works as our collections registrar in the archives. And then I'm going to turn the program over to Megan Elps, who is our marketing and programming manager, and she's going to introduce our panelists and talk you through CONVERGE. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen for that. Let's get rid of that. Thank you very much. And we'll put you on speaker view. And Megan, please take it away.
Hi, welcome everybody to the program. Thank you so much for coming today. My name is Megan Elms. I'm the marketing and program manager at the Artist Archives, the Western Reserve, and I had the privilege of developing this amazing panel today, and I'm really grateful for that. Before I begin, I do want to mention our final upcoming CONVERGE program. We've had a lot of them, and this one's a great way to end it off. It is Doll Making with Pride. It's a workshop with Joyce Morrow-Jones, and it's going to be held on Saturday, October 16th and Sunday, October 17th. In case you don't know, Joyce is actually a brilliant fiber artist who is currently the artist in residence at the Museum of Contemporary Art Cleveland, so MoCA. She also was part of the 2019 Seen Unseen exhibition, which combined the C. Betty and Carrie Davis collection of African-American art with 30 regional artists. It was a blockbuster, and her work was beautiful in it. If you'd like to attend this workshop on the 16th and 17th, you can register on artistarchives.org. So now to the task at hand, today's program. First, I want to express my gratitude to everybody who's attending this program, and I actually took the time to join tonight. Despite receiving a lot of positive attention from news outlets and, flurry of organizational promotion, and trust me, I was doing the flurrying, there was a flurry, many people were still actually hesitant to register for the program. Sadly, after decades since the start of the epidemic, AIDS is still something that is a challenging subject for people to discuss. That's why programs like these, and most importantly, panelists and people like this, are so important. They refuse to let AIDS fade from view. And for that, I'd like to thank each and every one of them for being here tonight, and for you for keeping the conversation alive. So before we get going, here's how the tech of the program is going to work today. Chat. I know you're all painfully familiar with Zoom, but here we go, right? Chat looks like a little bubble at the bottom of it. If you have any problems during the presentation, go ahead and put it in the chat. I will reach out to you. You can also use the hand raise function in Zoom versus this. I won't see this. And then for the fun part, the Q&A for this evening, there's actually two ways to do Q&A. First is using the Q&A function in Zoom. Looks like two little bubbles. So you can go ahead and type your questions in there. You can even upvote questions. If you see something else that somebody asks and you like that, upvote it. Please don't put questions in the chat. Honestly, I'll miss them. I'll probably run right over them. So if you want them asked, Q&A is the way to go. And then second, you can also have the option of asking your questions out loud. This will be audio only. We don't have the video capacity, so you can still be in your bathrobe. But at a certain point when the Q&A starts, I'll ask people to raise their hands that would like to speak out loud a question, and I'll call on you and we'll be able to do it that way. So you'll get a little notification. So actually, that is everything. If you have anything else, just let us know. And without further ado, I'd really like to just gratefully introduce Martha Pontoni, who will be leading the ship today, and she is amazing. So here, take it over, Martha.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you for the honor of doing this. It is quite an honor. It's quite an honor for me. It's wonderful to see that we have 46 people here to listen to us this evening. That's a wonderful number. And we have something important to say, or these panelists have something important to say. Lots of you know who I am. I haven't done anything too recent, but I was the, is it echoing, Megan?
Ever so slightly, but not bad. You can keep going.
Not bad. Okay.
If it gets bad, I'll pop in and I'll totally let you know. I'll keep an ear on it.
Okay. Thank you. I didn't want to like blow anybody's ears out. But anyway, so AIDS has been around for a long time, and there's been lots of us who have been around AIDS for a long time. I was not active in the actual AIDS movement because I was very busy with the lesbian and gay movement, but they really did intersect, didn't they? And I helped start and publish for many years the Gay People's Chronicle, which is not publishing anymore, but we had a really good run of it. I helped start Pride, because it's another thing I thought we needed in this city was not only a newspaper, but a Pride festival in March. We had the festival in 1989 and had the first March in 1990. So it was quite a while ago. And then various and sundry other things through the years. But the AIDS epidemic has always been close to my life. I haven't been very far from it. I've lost, as we all have, some very important people in my life. And so it is always kept, I have always kept up to date and knowing what was going on and getting people, keeping the dialogue in the right spot where we want to keep it. I had a roommate who passed, and we were very close. And then after that happened, lots of people passed, and I actually ended up stopped going to funerals unless I was very close to you because I couldn't do it anymore. My heart just couldn't do it. And we lost so many people, and amongst those people we lost were some incredible artists. So I hope we'll be able to talk about them tonight. But in the meantime, we have three wonderful panelists: Daniel Marcus, Carmen Lane, and Gil Kudrin. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves. And we're going to go with Daniel first. If you want to go ahead and take it away, Daniel.
Sure. Thank you so much, Martha. And thanks to Megan and to Mindy for the invitation and for sailing all of us through. And it's a total pleasure to be here and to share this space with my co-panelists and with the audience who we can't see, but whose presence we feel very much. So let me just share screen here. There we go. So I have some slides to show that kind of go along with what I'm going to say. Just by way of introduction, I am currently at the Wexner Center for the Arts down in Columbus and have been there for about a year. Before I was at the Wex, I worked at the Columbus Museum of Art and became one of the co-curators of Art After Stonewall, an exhibition that we opened in New York City in 2019 at the Gray Art Gallery and at Leslie Lohman Museum, but which came to Columbus just like 10 days before the first lockdowns in 2020. So this exhibition really defined my kind of working life for about 2 years, and I became really close to it and to its guest curator, Jonathan Weinberg, and to the many artists and supporters who were a part of it. When I came to the Wex, I was aware that there was an exhibition in the kind of back catalog of OSU that almost coincided with the opening of the Wexner Center itself. This is AIDS, the Artist's Response. And I learned about this show very, really in the first weeks of my starting work at the Wex. And it prompted me to become interested in the organization the institution that had organized it, which was called the University Gallery of Fine Art. And that institution preceded the Wex and in so many ways laid the groundwork for what the Wex would be or how the Wex came to be. So initially I was interested in, this kind of background history. It all became the seed of an exhibition that I'm working on now called To Begin Again, A Prehistory of the Wex, 1960. Exhibition, AIDS, the Artist's Response figures very centrally in that exhibition, as it was the final show at the University Gallery before that institution was decommissioned. This exhibition was held in Columbus and it was organized as an open call with a guest curator, Janzita Grover, who was based in San Francisco. So it brought an extraordinary range and quantity of artworks and activist projects to Columbus at a critical moment in the first decade of AIDS activism. Again, the year here is 1989, February to April. The exhibition also brought the Aids Quilt to Columbus, and although this became an important part of the legacy of the university's president, Ed Jennings, at the time, this was not on the menu for the university or for the Names Project Foundation. There was a kind of hesitancy on the part of the university to embrace the quilt, and the Names Project was curious about Columbus as a possible site for the quilt, but wasn't sure that it was really going to bring in the sufficient visitor numbers to make it worth everyone's while. Thanks to the courage and really the incredible fortitude and endurance of two of the staffers at the University Gallery who worked on the project, Lynette Molnar and Mark Svede, the Names Project folks were convinced, and the quilt came to Woody Hayes Athletic Center, a sort of symbolically important location at the university in that it's named after the famous football coach, Woody Hayes, whose politics were not exactly aligned with activist movements of his moment, to put it mildly. So this was a real coup and a huge event, in the life of Columbus's LGBTQ plus communities at the time. The exhibition again was an open call juried show, so it brought in an outpouring of work to the gallery. I mean, you get a sense here from some of this documentation of just like how jam-packed the space was. The works included in the show really ran the gamut from especially you see over here, sort of safer sex posters, but also portraits of people with AIDS, and agitprop. Here's a portrait by the Bay Area-based photographer in Meredith, and video. There was a film video program that, again, kind of everything with the show, sort of a matter of overwhelming quantity. So there were so many works on video, and so many works not on video.
Uh-oh, looks like we might have lost Daniel for a minute.
Oh, I see him back. Let's give it just a second. We've learned that if we hop too fast away from a panelist, it turns into a traffic jam, so.
Martha, is there anything you want to say? Well,
yeah, as long as we're talking, I sort of brought up the idea of the intersection between AIDS activism and gay and lesbian activism. And I told this story last week, but this is the Chronicle's introduction to AIDS activism was when we were asked to print safer sex instructions. And we, as a group, were like, I don't know, but then we did. And
I'm so very sorry.
It's okay.
that's okay.
Let me just finish real quick and we'll go right back to you. So we did, and boy, did we catch heck for that. We lost advertisers, we lost distribution points, we lost everything. And it was so amazing how many people, I mean, when I knew that information could save lives, I said, yeah, let's do it. When I explained to other people that it was going to save a lot of lives, it didn't matter to them. Because it didn't matter because it had those words in there, penis, anal, we all of a sudden, gay people, the gay men, gay lesbians were sexual people, and they don't want to think about that. So they didn't want it around, but we always did it, and we kept it in there till we stopped publishing. So just one little piece of history, and I'm going to go back to Daniel to finish his talk.
I would love to have got that full piece of history. I'm so sorry. This always happens when it matters the most, and then my internet just decides, no, it doesn't want to cooperate. Let me just go back to where I was, and I'll try to be really quick because I don't want to take too much time here. I just want to give you a sense of the range of works included in the show, and we can talk about this more during the Q&A. ACT UP related. Agitprop was very present in the exhibition and in the kind of activism that came shortly. There was an installation in the men's bathroom that kind of worked with and around the need to both represent AIDS, but also to work through the kind of language with which the disease is discussed in the media. And I really wanted to come to this because this for me is such a significant piece of the exhibition. This was a project by Mark Svede, who is still in the Columbus area and teaching at OSU to this day. He and his partner at the time, Edward Bunz, collaborated to make this project an installation called The Convalescence of a Young Man in a Small Town. Mark made this with Ed, thinking about the need both to have more representation for Columbus-based and Ohio-based artists in this exhibition, which drew largely from the two coasts, but also thinking about the particular kind of politics around AIDS in Columbus, where in many ways the epidemic was sort of beneath the dignity of representation, in especially at the level of the city newspapers, news media, TV media, and a lot of kind of activist energy in the year or two after this show would be focused in particular on the Columbus Dispatch, which really touched AIDS only as lightly and infrequently as it possibly could. So Mark's piece with Ed here draws quotations from the Dispatch draws those quotations out and puts them on the wall of a kind of dilapidated shack. On the shack is a kind of empty outdoor chair with a male nude painted on it. I have to think this is in some ways a reference to Columbus's status as the bodybuilding center of the universe with the Arnold and all of that. And the quotation, Mark discussed this at the time, the quotation that really kind of drew his ire was doctor's plea: give care for AIDS patients or let them quickly die without medical intervention. And for Mark, this sort of either or, take your pick. You can give care, but you could also let them die. I mean, that really summed up the kind of cavalier attitude of the dispatch at the time. And again, the real kind of point that the show was trying to make, as well as this work, it really had to do with visibility, simply making AIDS visible as an issue that mattered in Central Ohio and in Ohio generally, was sort of the order of the day. I just wanted to get in, this is another little part of that installation. I wanted to get in this last slide from a propaganda leaflet from ACT UP Columbus, which is founded around the same moment as the exhibition. And this is a sort of satirical assault on the Columbus Dispatch, in which ACT UP declares war on the paper for its silence or its. So that's probably as much time as I have, and maybe a bit more. We can come back to all of this, but I'm completely I'm just ready to hear from other panelists. So thanks.
Great. Thank you, Daniel. That was really neat. And just though everybody who's here knows, Cleveland and Columbus didn't talk to each other back then. We were very different cities with not a lot of back and forthness. That changed, of course, because of this epidemic and because of other things. But, I certainly was around and involved, but I didn't go to that. And I, not feeling great about it right now. So let's
You're
move
absolved,
on.
but we should all talk more.
I must look Catholic. Anyway, so the next presenter is M. Carmen Lane, and they're going to give you a little bit of an introduction. So take it away, Carmen. There you go.
Hi, everybody. So I'm a participating artist in the CONVERGE exhibition. So I'm going to kind of enter this conversation both in the context of what's called a lived practice, which examines the reciprocal relationship of art and life. That is, the artist practitioners are shaped by our experiences, and they in turn create and enhance, through our body of work and our practice, the experience of others. And so for me, as an artist and someone who is from Northeast Ohio, that the issue of the lived experience of people living with HIV and AIDS has been a part of my reality since I was a young person. And the dissonance and the gap between how the environment experiences people living with HIV and AIDS and LGBTQ people, and what is actually happening to the quality of our lives. I can't talk about HIV and AIDS without talking about race, because the dissonance and the intersection of racism, sexism, homophobia contributes to the conditions that make people targets for infection and death. And so I can't say that people in my life have died from complication to HIV and AIDS, that people have died because of oppression, whether it's HIV, racial violence, transphobia, homophobia, ableism, misogyny, that those are a part of the lived experiences that I have had as an artist, both being the target of oppression as a two-spirit person, as a queer person of color, both within the LGBT community, outside of it. And all of that impacts how I make meaning when it comes to dismantling systems of oppression and really what I think about when I think about an epidemic that has a parallel process to the COVID-19 pandemic, not in what's happening to people, but how the environment wishes to respond to people who are vulnerable to disease. And so for me, the pattern isn't what happens to people who are marginalized, but the pattern is the behaviors that people who are in the dominant group continue to engage in that takes people's lives away, formally and informally, consciously and unconsciously, passively, and actively. So the image that I'm showing you is my contribution to CONVERGE. And this work is called Children Wade In. And it is an image of the former Coliseum in Cleveland on Euclid Avenue that once was a site of house ball, Black ballroom culture, and as an after-hour space for Black queer culture. This image was taken by an elder from the Black LGBT community, Rita Knight Gray. So I want to acknowledge their work. And I want to say a little bit about my practice in that my work is about the experience. It's about memory. It is grief and mourning is a material for my use. And I'm aware that the impact of art in combating perceptions around HIV and AIDS have deeply impacted my aesthetic, consciously and unconsciously. I was 17 years old when I went to DC and walked along the mall to the Aids Quilts. And I remember feeling the disgust of being with my senior classmates, that rather being impacted deeply with compassion and empathy and an increased awareness, that they got smaller and crass with their words and their language, that I was so embarrassed that I walked away from my senior class because I was impacted in a significantly different way by that work, by that public art. The Coliseum, I remember a young Black gay man ODing in front of this structure. I remember at 3 o'clock in the morning, a house music, bottled water, no liquor license, just Black queer people dancing full of joy. And when a particular song came on, the entire basement of the Coliseum emptied. And about 30 Black gay men came out of nowhere, dancing, voguing to a house version of Wade in the Water at 3 a.m. And at 3 a.m., I was enjoying myself, having a good time, and simultaneously, I was feeling the loss and the grief of all of us in that room being denied some kind of inclusion in our communities. That the only church that some people were getting in that basement that night was that sound, was that song, was that rhythm, was the container of that space temporarily allowing us to be together in a way where we were human. So for me, when I think about HIV and arts and activisms in the here and now, what is the invitation to all of us to understand that people are still losing people to HIV and AIDS? That it is not discussed and talked about and visualized in the same way in the 80s and 90s, and yet people are still losing people. I came out in 1993, and for me, I was being brought into the queer community by people who were already grieving all the people they had already lost before I came out. So it changes the conditions of what the LGBT community is once an entire generation of people have gone away. So what does it mean to enter into something new in a container of so much loss? This is a work by Ronald Moe. He is also exhibited in this exhibition. His work has never been seen or hung or exhibited. He died alone as a Black gay man in East Cleveland. I mean, there are people in this community who knew him, who don't acknowledge that to this day that he was gay or that he was an artist. And so I'm proud to have supported his work being exhibited at the LGBT Center of Greater Cleveland. But there's the cumulative impact of HIV, of racism, of internalized oppression, of our continual silences that kills people. And there's activism and work in the world that has saved people's lives. And art is one medium. And so for me, the aliveness of Ronald Moe in his work is important for me in this conversation about HIV and AIDS, because I'm aware that people in my life, even today, I'm aware that they are HIV positive, and we have never had the conversation. I'm also aware that Black women, heterosexual, have the highest rate of HIV, and yet Black, white gay men and gay men are still scapegoated, you know, in systems around donation of blood. And so in many ways, it's pitting the Black community still against the queer community. Dave Chappelle has a show out today on Netflix in which he's engaging in the same kind of binary thinking. And the thing about queerness, the thing about being Black, being Indigenous, being queer, living at the intersections of edges and edges, is that we can hold paradoxically the complexity of all things, and that we have ancestors that can guide us and speak to us and join in with us in a new way of thinking about this subject. And so it's an honor to be on this panel with Daniel and particularly with Gil. So I'm happy that Martha asked me to go second, because I think it's really important that we all hear within a particular context the work that Gil has been doing. I'm going to share a few more slides. These works aren't about HIV and AIDS, but it is about racism. It is about sexism. It is about white supremacy violence and the impact that it has on family systems. And queer family systems are family systems. And so a lot of my work in particular looks at objects and artifacts and how to create moments that take the viewer to the edge of naming the thing internally that they don't want to speak. And so that's, for me, is the invitation of being a participant in this exhibition in this year. This is a work about my grandmother. And the reason I wanted to share it, the image on the left is when she entered hospice, and the image on the right is shortly after she passed away. But she was the first person to take me to the Aids Quilt. She was the first person to name for me one of her losses, which she was a public school teacher in CMSD, and she saw the quilt that was made for her friend and colleague. And she didn't keep that inside of herself. She shared it with me. And so it was important to me that the people around me who loved me could demonstrate that they did not have shame or disgust or fear for human beings living with AIDS, that they could still grieve out loud for people who have died from AIDS. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you, Carmen. That was really beautiful. In a great way, bringing some new information about things. And I remember, and I concur about the idea that gay men have been scapegoated, and that there was a lot of people of color. And the way it started out is the people of color weren't getting any help, you know. So a little different now, I suspect, but it was always been an issue since the very beginning, and I appreciate you speaking about it. Our last panelist is Gil Kudrin, good friend of mine and my wife's, and he is a very special person in this community, and he has a lot to say, so I'm going to let him go ahead and introduce himself to all of us.
Hi, I hope my sound's good. This is actually my first Zoom from my new house. When I started talking to Kelly about the concept of CONVERGE, I think Larry Kramer was still alive when we first started talking about CONVERGE. And I'm painfully aware that, because in the last few days, I put a post up about this event happening, and it was about a study that showed when researchers looked back at blood and tissue samples for gay men, in particular in New York and San Francisco and a few other major cities in the US in the early 70s, HIV was already pretty rampant in New York City, and moved to the West Coast later. And I lived right down the street from where I'm living now, with the first partner I had as an adult in 1978, when Larry Kramer's book Faggots was published. And I remember my partner was about 5 years older than me, and he traveled for work sometimes. And you could not find gay books in Cleveland. It wasn't like there was an Amazon back then. There was no internet, there were no cell phones. We had amazing bars, and they attracted people from New York. And in turn, then we ventured off to New York. And my partner, particularly, unbeknownst to me, spent a lot of time in New York before we met. And on one of his business trips, picked up Larry Kramer's Faggots, and I remember sitting in our apartment on Lake Road in what was then a huge, thriving gay community, reading Larry's work and just falling in love with Larry because he was so profound and so insightful into gay men and the conditions under which gay men and women had been raised, and the society that we lived in, and how toxic it was, and how that affected all of our relationships together. Taking that deep of a dive and such an honest look at our own community and what was done to us and what in turn we did to each other, made people so angry with Larry that there were times when he would walk on Christopher Street in New York City and people would walk up to him and spit in his face. People would yell at him, they would scream at him, and they would say he was anti-sex, and Larry was like, no, I'm pro-love. You know, I really wish we all just loved each other more. Nothing wrong with the sex, but you know, there's more to it than that. So when HIV started, I was already a close follower of Larry's, and I started reading everything he wrote, started educating myself about AIDS, and I had been sick for several years. By the time they discovered what was causing so many gay men on both coasts to get sick, I actually got sick in 1978, got very sick, deathly ill, and so was my partner. And he had had a surgery because they thought he had some sort of Crohn's disease, but it turned out to be CMV colitis. And we muddled our way through till 81 when we heard about AIDS, and I knew I was sick and infected and nothing to be done. Just as soon as Larry started preaching safer sex, it's what I did. And I got interested in art as AIDS was, you know, it was part of the AIDS movement, was the art of Keith Haring, all the activists in New York, ACT UP chapters from around the world. And locally, we had a group that started Night Sweats and T-Cells. Martha, when you were talking about the Pride in 1990, I think that was the first year we had a booth selling our shirts at Pride. Michael and I marched across the bridge and set up our table, and several of the artists that were there that day. I can't remember Paul's last name, but if you remember Paul, he was a heavyset guy, he was in a wheelchair, and his partner was very skinny and tall, and Paul was just covered with chaos, and so was his partner. And you know, this was, his partner was pushing him in his wheelchair, And his partner was mobile, but had to be on an IV. So he had his IV hung on Paul's wheelchair. It was the last time I saw them both, was at Pride, that day. And I remember, seeing so many people's work and so many people disappear from the neighborhood around 117th and Clifton in such a rapid fashion that there was one day I was trying to think about an African-American man that I knew that was gay. He was a model, he was a singer, he used to perform at Club Isabella's. And I couldn't remember his name. So many people had died. So many, literally hundreds of people in our neighborhood had died. And it was Otis. I don't know if you remember Otis or not, if anybody remembers him. But he used to sing at Club Isabella's sometime. He was just a fixture in our neighborhood. And slowly that disappeared, but I thought that our art was preserving the memories of these people. Fast forward, the idea of CONVERGE. Last year, a little over a year ago, Larry Kramer died. It was a huge loss to me. Larry and I had become close over the years. We shared dozens of friends, and still do. And at the 1-year memorial of Larry's death at the AIDS Memorial in New York, his partner, his husband, David, as a way of remembering Larry, was wearing a shirt that Larry and I had designed together, and had one of the early ACT UP guys read Larry's quote from Reports from the Holocaust. The shirt that I'm wearing is one that I designed for Larry, because in his later years, he was doing a lot of speaking. The Normal Heart got a lot of attention, drawn back to AIDS, drawn back to the activism. Bring this in with COVID, and we see our communities of color being devastated just like we have of AIDS. This is really unusual to live through 2 plagues in one lifetime. And the inaction of our government in both plagues is astounding to me, that we're still tolerating this. And the numbers of dead that, one of the early shirts that I designed with Larry was a quote from him when there were only thousands dead, saying, etch this thought in your mind. There are millions of us yet to die. And 37 million plus people have died of AIDS in the world. It is not over. In 44102, which has got one of the highest rates of COVID infections and lowest rates of vaccinations, it's also one of the highest rates of new HIV transmissions. And friends of ours that work in the field are still diagnosing people every week, having to tell people that, you've been exposed to HIV, and we still do not do a very good job of protecting people or educating people. And I think my art has helped. It has helped me. It has helped me stay alive. The article that I posted about HIV being around so long was that, my comment on it was that my survival, my early infection was not rare. My survival has been. And I think it has been directly impacted by my art, my work with Broadway Cares, my work with Larry, my own work, my work with Night Sweats and T-Cells. Art has given me a voice, and I was pretty voiceless. I was a pretty shy guy when I first started volunteering at the Living Room. It was an AIDS drop-in center, and one of my assignments was to go out and work at St. Malachi's with some of the first AIDS patients that they accepted into hospice in Cleveland. And I remember Gail Anderson one day telling me years later, that she remembered this, shy, quiet, young gay man coming to help. And she couldn't imagine how I could do that because she knew I was positive. I made no secrets of it. And all of the volunteers in our team were HIV positive. And she said, I always knew you could have ended up in that bed. You could have been the next person to occupy that bed. I said, I always knew that too. She thought I was courageous. I said, I wasn't actually. I was making sure somebody knew what they were doing around there and how to take care of us, because I knew I could end up in that bed. You were the courageous one. You could have walked away at any time. You weren't living with AIDS. I couldn't afford to walk away. If we hadn't built systems to care for us, there would not be a vaccine for COVID today. The work that went into developing the vaccine for COVID was done on the back of the work that was done on treatments for HIV. And that work was done in a great part by people with HIV. If anybody can get their hands on a copy of the DVD or the book, Surviving a Plague, Anthony Fauci will tell you, there was medicine before Larry Kramer and there was medicine after Larry Kramer. This is the AIDS activists that helped develop the drug.
Yeah, I think we're going to go into that a little bit while I'll talk more about the intersection between COVID and AIDS. And so, but we're really behind. So I was wondering if you could just, thank you. I appreciate it. There are so many things, that you brought up for me, and I want to tell one quick little story until we move on to the next question. I don't know if any of you out there remember Linus Harrell, but he did have the only gay bookstore in Cleveland, and it was a porn store, and it was a bookstore, and it was a DVD store, or there was no DVDs then, there was VH cassettes and all that. And he came to Pride 90 in his wheelchair, and he looked at Bob Downing, who was my close friend and co-publisher, and he said, I have seen the promised land, but I'm not going to make it. And I cannot tell you the chills of all that. He did not make it, of course, but he saw what our community here in Cleveland could be like, that we could be a cohesive community, and we could take care of our people. And the living room, of course, is one of the very first ones that, and that was brought in by Aubrey Wertheim, and who unfortunately died a little earlier than his time, not of AIDS, but of a lymphoma. But he created something that no one else had. And so, I mean, there, between you and me, Gil, we could talk all night. So I got to be really careful about that and move on to a question. So, we've lost a lot of artists to AIDS. You mentioned Keith Haring. Warnerovich is another one that my wife particularly is connected to. I was wondering if any of you would like to speak the name of and Carmen spoke the name today already, but if there's more of artists who have passed from AIDS, that, what could they be doing if they hadn't died way before their time? What kind of art could we have? What kind of place can Cleveland or Columbus be that these men have left us? I'll just throw it out there, and we'll let, if anybody wants to speak a few more names, we can go with that, and then we'll move on.
Neil Kraus.
This is the name of an artist from Cleveland who lived in San Francisco, but Jerome Chaya.
I'll speak the name of Jamie, who was a Cleveland man who invented graphic arts on a computer, and totally not known for that anymore, because as soon as he got it rolling, he was no longer with us. But he definitely was an artist that could do great things. Carmen, is there anybody else you'd like to have their name spoken tonight?
No.
Okay. All right, I want to show you, we talked about, that Gil had brought up that there wasn't any AIDS medication until there was ACT UP. There wasn't any, movement. They wanted to do double-blind studies, and, it was going to take years, and nobody understood that years was not, we didn't have years, that people were dying at some incredible rates. And so this is our second plague for a couple of us, or for some of us. And I think that there is a lot of the same, but AIDS did open that door. And I wanted to show you a couple of things that I think changed the way we saw AIDS. Oh, Women in the Quilt Project. Yes, absolutely. And see if you can have some comments on that. The first thing, I'm going to share my screen. And the first thing I want to share is this picture that was in the New York Times recently. And this last part, does this look familiar to anybody? These are flags of everyone who's passed from COVID, laid out in a grid for everyone to see. And there are names on all of those flags. Those are names of all those people. And so, learning, we learned from AIDS how to treat, change medicine, and we also changed grieving at the same time. There's one more thing I want to show you, then I'd like to get your comments on this particular thing. So let's see if I can get to my desktop again. Nope. No, I'm not. Try to go back this way here and start sharing again. Not as good with and desktop. There we go. Come on, there we go. Okay, and there it is. Sorry, I should have had that pulled up. Does everybody remember this picture? Again, it's a white person and not a person of color, but it was in Newsweek, and it became the face of AIDS. This young man was dying, and his young man had a father and a mother and a sister, a little sister. And it's not missed on me, or hopefully anybody else, how this looks like Jesus here too. So this picture, the death of Rock Hudson, the AIDS quilt, all of that changed, even if a little bit. Changed how we see AIDS and how we work with it. And I'd just like to get your comments on AIDS and COVID in the intersection of that.
Martha, real quick, we didn't actually see the last image, unfortunately.
Oh. Okay, I will figure out how to do that real quick.
I know the image that you're going to reference, and
Okay.
enough, he was a man from Columbus.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh
he
my gosh.
lived in Columbus, and it's one of those things that happened through the state of Ohio during the time of AIDS, when the Ohio AIDS Coalition was formed, and we started having healing weekends and moving them around the state and bringing people from all over the state to weekends, and many people knew him, and I didn't. I can never get that image out of my head. It's so iconic, and he was from Columbus.
Wow, and we're hearing from Lucy Zimmerman that his two-spirit caregiver was cut out of the photo. Of course, there is a link to the picture in the chat now, so if you want to see it, I think you'll all recognize it. It made a big change, and the fact that he was from Columbus really touches me here. Does anybody with either of the other panelists like to speak on it?
Yeah, for me, I think it's important, and I'm going to say it again and again, that the first plague on this land didn't begin with America, but it began with colonization, and that the structure of this culture around use and abuse of resources and bodies and Black people contributes to why queer people are also material for the use of this culture, whether it's COVID, whether it's you know, the mass and these social issues. And the thing about the image of COVID, the COVID memorial, that I think is so poignant to my point, is that the image looks like KKK hoods on sticks. And I think it's poignant that white supremacy and the culture of whiteness puts all of us at risk across all of our differences as artists, as working class people, as Midwestern folks, as LGBTQ folks. You know, all of these differences become a vulnerability for harm. And until we attend to the largest present system, anything that impacts us, you know, disease, war, you know, those of us who live at the intersections of so many things will be the people who we lose first, and will honor the people who somehow have survived despite of it.
Thank you, Carmen. That's really makes it resonates. And so when I was thinking of that picture with all the white flags, how interesting it would have been if we had brown flags and black flags, and seen the communities that have been impacted the most with COVID also, that they missed an opportunity with that. They really did.
Martha,
yes.
would you mind just a thought? I mean, because it's a really powerful image, the one that you showed, and I really agree with Carmen that there's something, you know, haunting and sinister about it in some ways that I hadn't thought about in the moment when I, you know, saw it on the cover of the Times. And it just strikes me that, you know, something that, you know, this panel has to do with art, but also art from below, and art not made according to the terms and conditions of official culture, but art made by people who, you know, claim power for themselves. I mean, that's a lesson that I think has not really been learned in the COVID moment. There, you know, so much to say about the kind of the relationship between COVID and AIDS, but I mean, you know, that image is of a kind of bureaucratic death. I mean, that's an image of numbers made into, you know, signs, the simplest kind of signs. And it's not an image that has any of the kind of handmadeness of the Aids quilt. I mean, it doesn't, and the Aids quilt is just one kind of you know, bottom up memorial, one kind of, you know, people's memorial. That just seems something to dwell with. I mean, why is it that in the COVID moment, there actually has been, at least at the level of sort of national culture, like so little popular expression of mourning, there have been expressions of mourning, of course, but, you know, very carefully stage managed expressions. I don't know, just the scale of suffering is so enormous. It's hard to know what to say in the face of it.
No,
I hate to say this, but
it's a wonderful point. Oh, go ahead, Carmen, go ahead.
It's good. I hate to say this, but, you know, it is the one thing that is so different from AIDS and COVID is that I told somebody when we were talking about going through this again, I said, no, last time we could hug each other. We could hold each other. We could be in a room and sew a quilt panel together for somebody that we loved. It almost gives me hope that so many people have stayed away and have stayed safe. And it has been the hardest part of COVID for me because of the isolation from people that I love and the isolation of so many deaths of people that I love through AIDS. You know, isolation seems to be the one common thread, but you know, I think that a lot of people who died from AIDS would see this almost a little hopefully, in that maybe a lot of people were just following the rules because they really wanted to survive, and we may see that art happening down the road as it becomes safer to be together and mourn together and create together and memorialize together.
Well, I hope so. I hope that there's more. Carmen, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, one of the things that I wanted to say as we remember the LGBT community and the activism in Cleveland and Columbus. I can't speak to Columbus, but I can say that it's impacting me how much of it is mainstream kind of white organizations and naming of white contributors and activists. So I was on the board of Blackout Unlimited, and it was a Black gay organization that partnered with the AIDS Task Force of Cleveland. And it existed because of what was missing, that if you were, gay and Black and HIV positive, where did you get the support? Where did you get the understanding of the conditions of why this is what your life is? I worked at the Cleveland Rape Crisis Center in the early 2000s, and there was an educator at the AIDS Task Force that specifically did a support group for Black gay men who were HIV positive. And, I was very confused at why he asked me to come to do a session on sexual violence. And as I co-facilitated the group with him, and the group members shared 100% of these Black gay men who were HIV positive became infected as a result of sexual violence, as a result of age disparity relationships, as a result of, in the closet, older LGBT people who were offering to poor young people a so-called safety. And that is how they became HIV positive. So it's acts of violence and power that still contribute to this condition. And so it's not anybody's fault. It's not anybody's, it's not just about love or not loving, but it's whether or not the system that we're a part of will ever love people like us. And what is the purpose and function of art in cutting through that? And I just wanted to add that to what Daniel was bringing to the conversation.
Well, it's a really good question, Carmen. How is art going to change that? In your 100%, I know you don't need me to tell you you're 100% right, but you are definitely 100% right that there wasn't a mechanism, and there needs to be, and hopefully there will be. And as we get closer together, that we all see each other as part of this gay and lesbian community. I think that just from my own historical viewpoint, the first time that I ever saw at least a little bit of coming together was at Pride, when it was down at Voinovich Park, and all the white people were there in the morning, and then they would leave and all the Black kids would come in and dance all night. And it was amazing, but it wasn't what a lot of white people would think of the gay community. But it was, they were separate. We were very separate, and hopefully not to be so separate now. As we are after 8 o'clock and we only have 10 minutes left of our presentation, there's so many more questions I have on my list for you, but I'm glad that we started the dialogue. I think it might be important to go ahead and get to people's questions because they were great enough to attend, and we'll see what they have. So Megan, are you going to ask them, or do you need me to ask them from the Q&A?
So actually, that's great. So what we can do at this point is that I'm actually looking at, let's do it this way. Does anybody who is in the audience want to verbally ask one of the panelists a question? And how they would be able to do that is by raising their hand. Now, what that looks like is a little hand signal at the bottom. And then if they do, we will allow you to talk. If not, then we will actually, I think Kelly actually has a question. Mistake. So actually it's perfect. So Kelly, curator from CONVERGE. Yeah, fantastic. Hit it.
Yeah, so thank you, everyone. This was really, really amazing. And, a couple Saturdays ago, we partnered with MoCA and we had AIDS stories. And it was very, there was like 17, 18 of us. And it's stuck with me. I'm still thinking about it. But one thing that I just keep thinking is, this program here, that program a couple Saturdays ago, queer people, a little bit older people, do any of the panelists, like, what can we do to connect with younger people about these issues? You know, what if they would see Gil's screen print of Larry Kramer, would they even know who that is? Like, what can artists do, queer artists, to connect with the younger generation?
Actually, I'm going to screen share an image of Gil's work real quickly as well.
That's a great question, Kelly. Would anybody like to field that one?
I think you have to just keep doing our art and keep telling our stories, be willing to put yourself out there. I oftentimes share books. When I used to travel for work, I would go to gay bookstores, which mostly don't exist any longer, and buy secondhand copies of Larry's books, of Paul Manette's books, of many different people's books, and I would have them to give to young gay men and women who were trying to learn something about our history and who we are and where we've been. You have to keep telling the stories. You have to keep handing people books. You have to keep saying, watch Surviving the Plague. Peter Staley's book is coming out in a couple weeks, and I pre-ordered it on Amazon. I hate that there's not a gay bookstore to go to. I hate that I feel unsafe going into stores now, but I'm going to read Peter's book because it's going to be historic, and Peter is a historic figure, and he saved a lot of lives. Speak their names, say their names.
I guess I sort of have two answers to that question. I mean, one, I think, like, and this goes back to our conversation about isolation and popular organizing, people's organizing under COVID conditions. I mean, the moment that where I felt like, it wasn't the moment that it felt like lockdown had broken, but the moment that the kind of the isolation was broken for me was last May and June, when out of nowhere thousands and thousands of people were on the streets in, at least in Columbus. I mean, it lasted the whole summer. And that energy was driven by very young people who, they were babies during Black Lives Matter in 2014. They hadn't even experienced many of them hadn't experienced even that kind of wave of activism. So, I mean, I have just such a sense of, respect and in many ways pride for what people have done together, to show that the flame hasn't extinguished, and the fight hasn't gone out of us. And to Carmen's point about the interlocking of long standing oppressions and systems, designed to both to disempower and to crush people out of their humanity. I mean, it's heartening in some ways that in the midst of a pandemic, and in some ways as a response to the pandemic, I think, like, people so powerfully came together. I think, like, the question about what art can do, I just think, like, in so many ways, like, the onus is on all of us who work in cultural institutions to show as much art that touches and is informed by and is moved by and is born out of people's struggles. Like, we have to do that work, and we have to make opportunities for those young people who led the movements last summer and who continue that work today, like we have to make moments where they can go into spaces that they think are against them, and see themselves and see histories that they didn't know were theirs. I had a moment with, this is again, like right when the Stonewall show was going up in Columbus, where I'd been working with a group of artists and writers who were calling themselves the Nocturne Collective. And I'm going to put their project in the chat. They'd spent a couple months collecting oral histories from an intergenerational and very diverse group of queer people in Columbus, really emphasizing queer of color stories, and just kind of taking a microphone and letting someone talk for really as long as they wanted to talk. This project yielded an installation, like an audio installation in the exhibition. And I was taking some of the group through just to sort of, to figure out questions around the install, but also to see the show as it was going up. So it hadn't opened to the public yet. And one of the writers in the group, who had been a student of mine at OSU, was in, I'm not going to say who they were, but they were in tears the entire time, like from stepping foot into the show until leaving the building. And it was like a moment of discovering that their soul and their project and their purpose had validity because it had history. And that's just so, you can't invent that, and I just think we have to do that work, and we have to take every opportunity to do that work, because it's a lot more meaningful than most other things that come from visiting a museum. That is clear.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's very true. I think we have time for one more question.
Yeah, and we can actually do, there's two good ones. And so as long as
Okay,
we like
let's
do
do those.
the drop dead at 8:30, like it's a great conversation. We got to let stuff roll sometimes. That's what it's all about.
All
And
right.
I have two great questions in the Q&A I'm excited to ask. The first one is for Gil. So this is from Andrew Reach. Andrew Reach is an exhibiting artist in CONVERGE, and just an amazing support and amazing involvement in the community. He says, this question is for Gil. Speaking to the relationship of art and AIDS in the era of ACT UP, the appropriation of the pink triangle from the Holocaust, do you think this powerful symbol, through the language of graphics, brought more visibility to the cause than if this symbol wasn't used in early activism?
It certainly did bring more attention to it, but if you were a gay man going to New York City or San Francisco in the late 70s, early 80s, before AIDS, I wore a pink triangle pin on the lapels of my jackets almost all the time. The pink triangle and silence equals death was actually originally done by guys who were did that design as a it was being used by, to promote gay freedom and LGBT freedom, and they kind of merged that symbolism with ACT UP. And that symbol was already being used in New York prior to AIDS. And they were, it's why those books like Surviving the Plague and those things are so important, because you learn our history and you learn where those symbols come from. I always had a pink triangle pen on my, and being a printer, a screen printer in particular, when I see people come at me with like 8, 10 colors, 12 colors in a shirt, and then they're like, why is it so expensive? And it's like, okay, the guy who invented the gay flag, or first did the gay flag, I think he did 8 colors, and they couldn't get all the material or something, and they ended up with 6. But I often said that person never bought printing, or they had way too much money because they could afford to print as many colors as they wanted. And the pink triangle was kind of a gay go-to for the gay community, because we were reclaiming what was taken from us. There's a new movie, or a movie being released from the Hirschfeld Institute in Berlin that's been restored. It's being released in German, and it was the first big gay organization in the world, and he had over 100,000 members. And
Yes.
they found one of his early pro-gay films from the teens that was censored out of existence pretty much. And those famous movies that you see of the book burnings are actually the burnings of the Hirschfeld Institute in Berlin.
Thank you, Gil.
Wow, I had no idea about that. And I'm in among art history and literature and my things, I'm also German studies, and I didn't know that. And that's deplorable. That means that something's been written out of a narrative. If I didn't get it and I was studying it, then something's been willfully, deleted. And
all of us ACT UP people were nerds. We were not activists. We were nerds that read way too much. Rachel Maddow was an ACT UP San Francisco. That's the level of ACT UP people. We just
love you guys.
We took science because we were nerds, and we made the science work, and we made the system work because we were nerds.
And just so everyone knows that Gil's amazing company, I always reverse it because I have a little bit of dyslexia. Is it night cells and T sweats or T
Night
cells?
sweats and T cells.
Thank you, because I will absolutely 100% say that I have messed it up no matter how hard I think about it. And his amazing organization, that money from the sale of these shirts goes directly into the pockets of people with HIV/AIDS in order to support them. It doesn't get funneled through other oblique mechanisms that are out in the world. It's direct. And Gil is an amazing designer. So I will put the link for that. Please do take a look for it. So it's just amazing. I have a question for Carmen next. And Gil, thank you. You're like this bank of knowledge that is just amazing. I would love to see you write a book one day, or just do an oral history. So thank you. So our next one is for Carmen. So the question is, in the statement, Carmen, I'm very interested in your perspective on the still present formative traits of the American mentality. Where can I learn more? Do you have writings? How can I look into the further principles of system influences that you have mentioned here today?
I was just thinking about whether or not I wanted to answer that question snarky or serious. I would say you can certainly check out my website. I have a couple of essays. I have a book of poetry you can check out. It's called Calling Out After Slaughter. I have several essays. I have a work that I did during the pandemic called Some Notes on Racism During a Global Pandemic. It's a video work with the sound work connected to it. So that would be one piece. But I think a project that I steward in the Buckeye Shaker neighborhood is called a Tantic Center for Healing and Creative Leadership. And we have a resource library that has a ton of books on systems thinking, Black consciousness, and it's pretty much an archive of ephemera from the 60s of thinkers across all of those identities, race, gender, class, sexual orientation, group process, but I think most importantly, anyone, if we slow down enough and really allow ourselves to be evoked by the patterns of things happening in our world, we already know this. So as Gil brought up the pink triangle, I wore the black triangle when I was a teenager. And so when I think about the Holocaust as a system, both of genocide and erasure, not only were the Jewish people murdered in the Holocaust, but LGBT people, people with disabilities, Afro-Germans. So all of, gender nonconforming people. So all of these things that we still don't want to learn about in the intersections, that system was paying attention to the intersections historically. And so it's time for the rest of us to catch up.
I muted myself because I'm a good panelist. So that was, I just put your link into the chat, but I'm going to put the specific link for your center as well, because I had the general and the specific. So Carmen Center is amazing and an amazing resource for everybody in Cleveland. So I'm really looking forward for people here to check it out and continue their journey. So we had one solid question actually, which is that, and this is probably a very common question, even though I know the answer to it. It was a question of whether women were represented in the Quilt project. So I'm imagining whether there are squares dedicated to women in the Names Project quilt. If anyone would like to jump in on that one.
Women are certainly represented in the quilt project. When we gathered at your guys' organization not long ago, I mean, I told the story about Gert. The person who sewed all the panels together from the very beginning into those squares is a woman. And she's, you know, I've seen her commenting on Larry's death and on women, when they started dying of HIV. I think the thing to understand about the AIDS movement is that, you know, ACT UP was very much women and men. It wasn't just men. And there are a lot of famous women that were in ACT UP, and that, you know, scientists, Larry's doctor, if you watch the movie The Normal Heart or seen the play, she was an activist. She had polio when she was a kid. And she egged Larry on throughout, you know, the beginning of the AIDS pandemic. And women have always been pivotal in ACT UP. And when women started dying, it was the women and men of ACT UP that went to the CDC and fought to get the CDC to change the definition of AIDS, because women were literally dying at their desks. They couldn't qualify for disability because the disease process is so different in women, or can be, than is with men. And they were dying of diseases that didn't fit into the CDC definition of AIDS. So ACT UP went and fought with the CDC and got the federal government to change the definition of AIDS, the AIDS defining illnesses, so that women could get disability. So it's been a cohesive fight from the beginning.
Just one more thing, Megan. The AIDS quilt, the 13 panels are at Metro Health right now through this week. They'll be taken down on Friday. And I sat as a quilt sitter 2 times. And when I first went down there to pick up our panel that we have at the archives, I said to Jen Smith, I was like, there's probably over half of the panel squares are women. And she, you know, has a lot of stories of, drug users that had, gotten AIDS. And she has a married couple. The woman was a drug addict and clean for many years, didn't know she had AIDS until she was really sick. And so if you go down to Metro Health, part of CONVERGE is those AIDS quilts, and you could see a lot of women on those.
Perfect, thank you. And actually that's, perfect timing. So I'm actually going to throw it to back to Martha to wrap up the panel. And again, and then to Mindy after that, we'll do closing remarks. But again, my sincerest gratitude to everyone involved here. If you have anything that you'd like to continue with to ask the panelists, please, I'll put my email in the chat. I can route any additional questions to them, and I would be happy to do so. And just thank you so much for everyone for being here. And here is Martha to close this out for the evening.
All right. So first, I want to thank Megan for all the work she did with me to get this together. It's being no sense of irony is that I actually had COVID while I was trying to get all this done. Not a really bad case because I was vaccinated, but enough that put me on my back for a while. And she really picked up the mixing metaphors, but I will say she picked up the ball and ran with it. So I really appreciate it, Megan, I do. And Mindy for allowing us to have this. this is, and my dear wife, Kelly, who put Converge together. It's an amazing project. And I would encourage all of you to go to all the areas and see everything, because everything is good. So anyways, thank you, Carmen. Thank you, Danielle. Thank you, Gil. You all have, again, I could listen to you all night. I really could. And this is the kind of stuff now that will be preserved, right? We'll be here. It'll be recorded. It'll be up there. It'll be hopefully for people to see when they want to see it or need to see it. And our words will not die with us as we move forward. And I would encourage everyone out there to continue to do your art. Kelly has taught me that anybody can do art. So do your art and talk about it and show it off, and just be part of the community. So thank you again to everyone, and thank you, Mindy and Megan and Kelly.
Thank you, Martha. Very well said. Thank you, panelists. Amazing discussion. I am so pleased that we could have you all on tonight, and that and Gil and Carmen, that you are part of Converge. I really think it's a history-changing thing, that exhibition, and Kelly for putting in so much hard work in getting it together. We do have one panel, as Kelly said, of the Aids Quilt, which is up in our foyer. It would only fit in the foyer. Unfortunately, it's coming down on Friday. And so if you can get in tomorrow to the archives and see it, please do. And if you can join us tomorrow night at Metro Health, you will see all of the panels that are at Metro Health. And also, we will be able to add to a panel actively at the reception at Metro Health tomorrow night. So if you have something that you would like to put into that panel, we're going to try and make a Converge panel. If you have the name of someone that you would like to add to it, if you have some photographs, those can be stitched onto it. So do please join us for that. And thanks again, everyone. And great program, Megan. Thanks, you, another winner that you've put together for us. And I just want to say good night to everybody. Everybody have a good rest of the evening. Okay, good night. Thank you.